In this world of rapid change and disruptions, I believe that learning is more important now than it ever has been before. That means that we, as a learning and development discipline, really need to up our game. We need to modernize our approach to how we design and implement our various activities. In this brief video, I want to give some examples of some ways that we need to do a better job at what we're currently doing. One example is the use of microlearning. We know from neuroscience that the average adult attention span is 11 minutes. Therefore, microlearning is any learning activity that is 11 minutes or less. However, microlearning unto itself is not the complete answer. We need to organize those microlearnings in a coherent fashion by which we have macrolearning, or a learning path by which a certain learning objective can be fully achieved. We also know from neuroscience that after someone does have a learning experience, we then need to test them. We need to validate what they've learned to build it into memory. But even the word testing can be a problem because of the emotion that it can trigger and how that whole experience can also be a barrier to learning. So maybe we call it sustainment. Regardless, associated with our microlearning, we have to have micro-testing so we can really solidify that knowledge. This is where something like adaptive learning can come into play. Adaptive learning allows each of us to have a customized learning experience. You and I could take the same course, but because we come into that course with different pre-existing levels of knowledge and understanding, the technology adjusts the content and delivers a unique experience to each of us. It personalizes that learning experience. Not only does it make the experience more efficient, because it may take you 45 minutes to do a course that takes me an hour, but it also allows us to modulate the level of difficulty. We all know that if the course is too difficult, then we get nervous and we don't learn, and if it's too easy, we get bored and we don't learn. So it allows us to modulate just that right level of difficulty to maximize learning. But it also does something else. The micro-testing that's part of the adaptive learning process can allow us to do assessments, both at an individual and at an organizational level. We can actually determine what is the knowledge out there in the organization and how is it varying with time. We also know from neuroscience that we need to space our learning activity out. We just can't cram it all into one event. We need to give the brain time to process, to absorb information such that we can really embed it into memory. And without establishing memories, we're not really building knowledge. We're not really learning. At a recent neuroleadership conference, we've talked a lot about the concept of capacity. Capacity representing what limits our ability to learn. So we, as L&D professionals, need to really think about capacity when we're designing our learning activities, to make sure that we are not putting in too much content, hence that it cannot really be absorbed. We have to modernize our approach and use this as one of our key guiding principles as we design programs. We also need to educate our learners about the difference between recognition and recall. The brain can trick us into thinking we're learning because we look at some learning content and we recognize it. We read the page a few times, I know it. But no, we really haven't put that knowledge into memory, therefore we haven't learned it. So we need to make sure that people are testing themselves to make sure that they actually are absorbing the information they're being exposed to. We also need to expand the use of generative learning. We don't want people just regurgitating the same information back to us, writing down what we say. We need for them to reflect on it. We need for them to internalize it, to be able to expand it, elaborate on it in their own words. That will build much greater understanding. That will build memories. Therefore, that will help us truly to build learning. We also need to help people to build connections. Our learning content needs to link to each other, to build a coherent set of information that can reinforce and build connections between the knowledge we have and the new information, the new knowledge that we're learning. Through that process, we can help the brain to establish much greater memories to reinforce learning. That reinforcement needs to be consciously designed. Our learning programs need to have various tools that require us to recall knowledge over time, that ask us to elaborate on it, to maybe explain it to others, to really build connections to what we already know, that we can over time continue to reinforce that knowledge, to keep it from being forgotten. It's great that we have all these new technologies that allows us to design and deliver our programs in ever increasingly more efficient ways. But we need to make sure that we use those technologies correctly and that we don't just chase after the technology, that we stay focused on the learner, we stay focused on the right way to maximize learning. In a brief video like this, all we can really do is highlight a few concepts and terms. If you want to learn more, I highly recommend that you look at each of these two books. The authors do a great job at explaining it in far greater detail than we have here. And finally, thank you for taking the time to watch this brief video. Please now share your thoughts so that we all can continue to learn from each other.